Dad, we took a vote. You are no longer part of this family. My son Bradley said those words to me while I was holding a glass of eggnog, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I had put up myself 3 days earlier. The tree I had cut down from Henderson's farm, the same farm where I had taken Bradley every December since he was 5 years old. The lights I had spent an entire afternoon untangling, because my grandson Ethan had mentioned he loved the multicolored ones, not the plain white lights his mother preferred. I remember the exact temperature of that eggnog in my hand. Lukewarm. I remember the sound of Bing Crosby singing White Christmas from the speaker system I had installed in that house 22 years ago. I remember the smell of the honey glaze ham that had been my wife Patricia's recipe, the one I had learned to make myself after she passed. Because Bradley once told me that Christmas did not feel like Christmas without that particular ham. I remember all of these details because that is what happens when your entire world collapses in a single moment. Your brain takes photographs. It preserves evidence. It documents the scene of the crime with a precision that will haunt you for the rest of your life. But what I remember most is the smile on my daughter-in-law Megan's face. Not a smirk. Not a subtle expression of satisfaction. A full, genuine, radiant smile. The kind of smile a person wears when they have finally gotten exactly what they wanted, when a long campaign has reached its successful conclusion, when an enemy has been definitively defeated. My name is Jared Foster. I am 63 years old. I spent 41 years of my life building houses for other people, and I spent those same 41 years building something I thought was more important than any house. A family. I poured concrete foundations, and I poured love into my children. I framed walls, and I framed a life that I believe would shelter the people I care about most. I was wrong about almost everything, but I was not wrong about what I did next. Because while my son was delivering his little speech, while my daughter-in-law was smiling her victory smile, while my 14-year-old grandson Ethan was staring at his plate in obvious discomfort, I was thinking about the envelope in my jacket pocket. The envelope I had picked up from my attorney's office that very morning at 9:15, while the rest of the family was still sleeping off the previous night's Christmas Eve celebration. I did not interrupt Bradley. I let him finish. I let him explain that the family had discussed my behavior and had decided that my presence at family gatherings was disruptive and uncomfortable. I let him tell me that they would, of course, still call me on holidays and birthdays, and that I was welcome to see Ethan by appointment, as long as I gave them adequate notice. I let Megan add her thoughts, which she delivered in that particular tone she had perfected over the years, the one that sounds compassionate and concerned while communicating absolute contempt. We just think this is healthier for everyone, Jared. You will see. In time, you will understand that this is the right decision. I let my brother-in-law Don, Megan's father, nod along solemnly, as if he were witnessing a difficult but necessary medical procedure. Don, who had never liked me. Don, who had told his daughter before she married my son that she was marrying down. Don, who had spent 15 years making comments about blue-collar limitations and construction worker mentality. When they were finished, when the room had fallen into that particular silence that follows a pronouncement of exile, I took a sip of my lukewarm eggnog. I set the glass down on the coffee table, on the coaster my wife had made in a ceramics class 25 years ago, and I smiled. I appreciate you being honest with me, I said. I know that must have been difficult. Bradley looked relieved. Megan looked suspicious. Don looked satisfied. Before I go, I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket. I want to give you something. Consider it a parting gift. A final gesture from a father who apparently no longer has a family. I pulled out the envelope and handed it to Bradley. It was a standard manila envelope, slightly thick with documents. My son took it with an expression of confusion, perhaps expecting a sentimental letter, perhaps expecting a final guilt trip, perhaps expecting anything other than what was actually inside. He opened the envelope. He pulled out the papers. He read the first page. And then Bradley started screaming. But to understand why those papers made my son scream, to understand the full weight of what happened in that dining room on Christmas night, I need to take you back. Back to the beginning. Back to when I was a young man with strong hands and bigger dreams, a man who believed that hard work and loyalty were enough to build a life worth living. I need to tell you about the house. I built my first house when I was 19 years old. Not for myself. For a client, a young couple in Millbrook who wanted a starter home, nothing fancy, just solid construction and honest work. I was working for Patterson Construction at the time, learning the trade from old Walter Patterson himself, a man who believed that a house was not just a structure, but a promise that the roof would not leak, the foundation would not crack, the walls would stand for generations. Old Walter was a hard man. He had hands like leather gloves, stained permanently by decades with stain and concrete dust. He never raised his voice, never had to. When Walter looked at you with those faded blue eyes and said something was not right, you felt it in your bones. You fixed it. You did it again. You did it until it was perfect. A house outlives the people who build it, he used to say, standing on job sites with a cup of black coffee in one hand and a rolled-up blueprint in the other. Every nail you drive, every board you cut, that is your signature. That is you telling the world what kind of man you are. You want to be the kind of man who cuts corners? Fine. But 20 years from now, when that wall cracks or that roof leaks, your signature is still on it. Your name is still attached to that failure. I never forgot that lesson. I never cut corners. I never took shortcuts. Even when it cost me money. Even when it cost me time, even when clients complained that I was too slow, too careful, too obsessive about details they would never notice, I did the job right. I did it the way Walter taught me. I took that lesson to heart. Over the next 4 decades, I built over 300 houses. Some were modest, some were mansions. I built vacation homes on the coast and family farms in the countryside. I built apartment complexes and shopping centers and, once, a small church for a congregation that could not afford a fancy architect, but wanted a place to worship that would last. That church is still my proudest project, professionally speaking. The congregation had been meeting in a school gymnasium for 15 years, saving every penny they could, holding bake sales and car washes and fundraisers that brought in $20 at a time. When they finally had enough money to break ground, they came to me with a budget that would not have covered the foundation of most churches I had seen. We know it is not much, the pastor told me, a soft-spoken man named Reverend Coleman, who had been leading that congregation since before I was born. We know we cannot afford anything fancy, but we have faith that the right builder will help us create something worthy of our worship. I worked on that church for 8 months. I donated half my labor. I called in favors from suppliers who gave me materials at cost. I designed a building that was simple but beautiful, with high ceilings and tall windows that let the light pour in like liquid gold, and wooden pews that I built myself in my garage, each one carved with a small cross on the armrest. The day they held their first service in that church, I stood in the back row and watched those people file in, families who had been waiting 15 years for this moment, children who had grown up hearing about the church their parents were building, elderly members who had wondered if they would live long enough to see it completed. Reverend Coleman gave the sermon that day. He talked about patience and perseverance. He talked about the power of community. And at the end, he asked me to stand up. This building was made possible by many people, he said, but it was made real by one man. Jared Foster, would you please stand? I stood embarrassed as several hundred people applauded. Reverend Coleman walked down the aisle and shook my hand. You are not just a builder, Mr. Foster, he said quietly, so only I could hear. You are a servant of something larger than yourself. Never forget that. Never let anyone convince you that what you do with your hands is less important than what others do with their words or their money. You create shelter. You create homes. You create the spaces where people live and love and grow. That is sacred work. Every single structure I built is still standing. Every single one. I know this because I check. Every year, I take a drive through the counties where I have worked, and I look at what I have made. I look at the families living in those homes, the businesses operating in those buildings, the lives being lived inside walls that I put up with my own 2 hands. That church is still there too. Reverend Coleman passed away about 10 years ago, but his grandson leads a congregation now. They have expanded twice. They have over 1,000 members. And every time I drive past, I slow down just a little, just to look at the building I made possible, the sanctuary that exists because I believed in something more than profit. But the house I was proudest of, the house I poured more of myself into than any other, was a house on Maple Ridge Road. The house where my son had just told me I was no longer welcome. The house where I was sitting at that very moment, holding an envelope that would change everything. I bought the land in 1991, 2 years before I started construction. It was a foreclosure sale, 3 acres on a ridge overlooking the valley, with mature oak trees and a small stream running through the back corner of the property. The previous owner had planned to build there himself, but had run into financial trouble. His loss was my gain. Patricia and I drove out to see the land on a Saturday afternoon in April. Bradley was 6 years old, sitting in the back seat of our pickup truck, asking every 5 minutes if we were there yet. When we finally turned onto the dirt road that led to property, when the trees parted and the view opened up before us, Patricia grabbed my arm so hard she left marks. "Jared," she whispered. "Jared, it is beautiful." It was beautiful. Rolling hills covered in wildflowers. The distant sparkle of the river in the valley below. Oak trees that had been standing for 100 years or more, their branches spreading wide like protecting arms. And the silence, the deep, profound silence of a place that had never known the noise of highways or neighbors or the constant hum of modern life. "I can build here," I said. "I can build us something special." Patricia turned to look at me with those green eyes I had fallen in love with at the county fair 12 years earlier. "Promise me," she said. "Promise me this is where we will grow old together." "I promise." I built that house in 1993, the year my wife Patricia and I celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. Bradley was 8 years old. We had been living in a small ranch house in town, the kind of place that was fine for a young couple, but was bursting at the seams with a growing boy and all his toys and all his dreams. Patricia wanted a house with a big kitchen. She loved to cook, loved to host, loved to fill a room with the smell of good food and the sound of good conversation. She wanted a place where Bradley could have friends over, where we could have family gatherings, where life could expand into the space it deserved. We spent months on those blueprints together, side by side at the kitchen table of our little ranch house. Patricia had very specific ideas about what she wanted. The kitchen needed to face east, so she could watch the sunrise while making breakfast. The master bedroom needed to be on the main floor, separated from the rest of the house, because she valued privacy. The living room needed a real fireplace, not one of those gas units that were becoming popular, but proper wood-burning fireplace with a stone hearth where she could hang Christmas stockings. I designed that house myself. Every room, every closet, every window placement. I spent months on the blueprints, working late into the night at the kitchen table of our little ranch house, while Patricia brought me coffee and asked questions about what I was drawing. She did not just want a house. She wanted our house, a house that reflected who we were and who we wanted to become. "What about here?" she would ask, pointing to a wall on the blueprint. "Could we have a window here? I want to be able to see the oak tree from the kitchen." "We can do that," I would say, erasing and redrawing. "And the porch, can it wrap around the corner?" I always wanted a porch like the one in my grandmother's house, the one where you could sit and watch the world go by. "We can do that too." Every request she made, I incorporated. Every dream she described, I translated into lines on paper. That blueprint was not just a technical document. It was a love letter. It was a promise written in measurements and angles, in notes about materials and specifications, in the careful notation of every detail that would make this house her home. I built it with my own crew, my own hands, my own sweat. 11 months of work, from breaking ground to moving in. I remember every day of that construction. I remember pouring the foundation on a brutally hot July morning. I remember framing the master bedroom while Patricia watched from a lawn chair, pregnant with what would have been our second child, a pregnancy that would end in heartbreak 2 months later. That miscarriage nearly broke us. Patricia spent 2 weeks in bed, not sleeping, not eating, just staring at the ceiling and crying. I would come home from construction site, covered in sawdust and exhaustion, and climb into bed beside her and hold her until we both fell asleep. Neither of us talked about what had happened. We just held on to each other and tried to survive. Looking back, I think the house saved our marriage. Having something to focus on, something to build together, gave us a purpose beyond our grief. Every beam I raised was a statement that life would continue, that our family would grow in other ways, that this tragedy would not define us. Every wall I framed was an act of defiance against the universe that had taken something precious from us. Patricia started coming to the site more often after the miscarriage. She would bring lunch for me and the crew, sandwiches and lemonade and cookies she had baked that morning. She would walk through the emerging structure, touching the walls, imagining the life we would live there. She would make suggestions, small changes, adjustments that made the house more hers with every passing week. I remember installing the kitchen cabinets, custom-made from oak that I had sourced from a mill in Vermont. Patricia had found the mill herself, had spent hours on the phone with them discussing grain patterns and finishes and the exact shade of stain she wanted. When those cabinets finally arrived and I hung them in the kitchen she had designed, she stood in the doorway and cried. "They are perfect," she said. "Everything is perfect." I remember laying the hardwood floors board by board because Patricia said she had always dreamed of a house with real hardwood floors, not the laminate that was becoming popular, because it was cheaper and easier. That floor took me 3 weeks longer than it should have, working nights after the crew went home, fitting each board by hand to make sure the grain patterns flowed naturally from room to room. Patricia never asked me to do that. She never even knew I was doing it. But every time she walked across that floor, I knew she felt the difference. I remember the day we moved in, November 15th, 1993. Patricia cried when she walked through the front door. Bradley ran through every room, claiming spaces, already planning which friends he would invite over. I stood in the living room, looking at the fireplace I had built with stones from our property, and I felt something I had never felt before, the knowledge that I had created something permanent, something that would outlast me, something that would shelter my family for generations. The house cost me everything I had, every dollar I had saved, every favor I was owed, every ounce of energy in my body. By the time it was finished, I was broke and exhausted, but I was also home. That house was not just a building. It was a declaration of love. Every nail I hammered was a promise to Patricia. Every beam I raised was a commitment to Bradley. Every tile I laid was a statement that this family mattered, that our lives together were worth the effort, that I would do whatever it took to give them the foundation they deserved. Patricia lived in that house for 25 years. 25 years of Christmases around the fireplace I built. 25 years of summer barbecues on the porch that wrapped around the corner like she had always wanted. 25 years of watching the sunrise from the kitchen that faced east, drinking coffee in her bathrobe, thanking God for another day in the home her husband had made for her. Patricia understood this. She knew what that house meant. When she got sick, 12 years later, when the cancer started taking her away from us piece by piece, she made me promise that I would never sell it. "This house is where we became a family," she told me 2 weeks before she died. "Promise me it will stay in the family. Promise me Bradley will raise his children here." The cancer came without warning. One day she was fine, healthy, vibrant, complaining about the weeds in her garden and planning a trip to see her sister in California. The next day she found a lump. 3 days later, we were sitting in an oncologist's office, listening to words that did not seem real. Stage 4, metastatic, aggressive. The doctor kept talking about treatment options and clinical trials and survival statistics, but I could not hear him. All I could hear was Patricia's breathing, shallow and quick beside me, and the sound of our future collapsing. She fought. God, how she fought. 18 months of chemotherapy that left her weak and bald, and so thin I was afraid to hug her too tightly. Radiation treatments that burned her skin and left her exhausted for days afterward. Experimental drugs that made her nauseous and dizzy and desperate for any relief. I took care of her through all of it. I cooked for her, even though most days she could barely eat. I bathed her when she was too weak to stand. I held her hair, what little remained of it, when she vomited from the chemotherapy. I carried her to bed when she could not walk, and I lay beside her through the long, sleepless nights, listening to her breathe, terrified that each breath might be her last. Bradley was away at college during most of her illness. He came home for holidays and for the worst moments, when we thought we were losing her, when the doctors called to say we should prepare. But he was not there for the daily reality of watching his mother die. He did not see the courage it took for her to get out of bed each morning. He did not see the tears she cried when she thought no one was watching. He did not see the way she looked at the house she loved, touching the walls as if saying goodbye. She made me promise about the house on a Tuesday afternoon in April, 2 weeks before she died. We were sitting on the back porch, wrapped in blankets despite the warm spring air, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She was so thin by then that I could feel every bone in her body when I held her hand. "This house is where we became a family," she told me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me it will stay in the family. Promise me Bradley will raise his children here. Patricia, you're going to be fine. You are going to see Bradley get married. You are going to hold your grandchildren in this house. Jared." She looked at me with those green eyes that had captivated me at the county fair 30 years earlier. They were still beautiful, even sunken and tired, and filled with the knowledge of what was coming. "Do not do that. Do not pretend. Not with me. Not now." I could not speak. I just held her hand and tried not to cry. "I have made my peace," she said. "I have had a beautiful life. I have been loved by a good man. I have raised a son I am proud of. I have lived a home that was built just for me, with my dreams and my wishes in every room. I am not afraid to go, but I need to know that what we built here will continue. I need to know that our family will stay connected to this place." "I promise," I said. "I promise." She smiled, that Patricia smile that could light up a room even in the darkest moments. "Thank you. That is all I needed to hear." She died 2 weeks later, peacefully in the end, in our bedroom, in the bed we had shared for over 25 years, with me holding her hand and telling her that it was okay, that she could let go, that I would be fine, that I would take care of everything. The last thing she said to me was, "I love you, Jared Foster. I love the home you built for me. I will be waiting for you there, on the other side, in a house even more beautiful than this one." And then she was gone. I promised. Of course I promised. What else could I do? The woman I loved was dying, and she was asking me to protect the last thing that still mattered. After Patricia died, I stayed in the house. Bradley was 20 years old then, away at college, building his own life. I rattled around those rooms alone, surrounded by memories, cooking for one in the kitchen Patricia had designed, sleeping alone in the bedroom where we had spent 20 years together. The first year was the hardest. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for her, and my hand would find only empty space. I would cook dinner and set 2 places at the table before remembering. I would hear a sound in another room and call out her name before the silence reminded me that no one would answer. I talked to her constantly. In the garden, where I tended the flowers she had planted. In the kitchen, where her recipes were still taped to the inside of the cabinet door. In the living room, where her favorite chair sat empty by the fireplace, a throw blanket still draped over the armrest exactly as she had left it. "Patricia," I would say, standing at the kitchen window watching the sunrise, "the roses are blooming. You should see them. They are more beautiful than ever." "Patricia," I would say, sitting in my workshop late at night, "I finished that birdhouse you wanted for the backyard. I painted it blue, just like you described." "Patricia," I would say, lie alone in our bed in the darkness, "I miss you so much. I do not know how to do this without you." People told me I should sell. The house was too big for one person, they said. The maintenance was too much for a man my age, they said. I should downsize, simplify, move on. They meant well. They were wrong. That house was all I had left of Patricia. Her recipes were in those kitchen drawers. Her books were on those shelves. The garden she had planted still bloomed every spring, and every spring I tended it, even though I had never cared about flowers before she taught me to care. Selling that house would have been like selling her memory, like admitting that our life together could be reduced to a real estate transaction. So I stayed. I maintained the house like it was a sacred obligation. I replaced the roof when it needed replacing. I updated the plumbing, the electrical, the heating system. I kept the garden alive. I preserved everything Patricia had loved, everything she had touched, everything that still held the echo of her voice. When Bradley married Megan, I was hopeful. My son had found someone to share his life with, just as I had found Patricia. When they had Ethan, I was overjoyed. A grandson, another generation. The family Patricia had wanted was continuing, growing, becoming what she had always dreamed. I still remember the first time Bradley brought Megan home to meet me. It was Thanksgiving, about 3 years after Patricia's death. Bradley had been living in the city, working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm, and he had mentioned a few times that he was seeing someone. I had been encouraging him to bring her home, eager to see the woman who had captured my son's heart. Megan arrived in a white Mercedes that I later learned belonged to her father. She stepped out wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my first truck, and she looked at the house with an expression that I misread at the time. I thought it was appreciation. I thought she was admiring the craftsmanship, the way the porch wrapped around the corner, the way the stone chimney rose against the autumn sky. Now I know that expression was appraisal. She was calculating square footage. She was estimating property values. She was looking at her future inheritance and deciding whether it measured up to her expectations. But I did not see that then. I saw a beautiful woman who made my son smile, and I welcomed her into my home with open arms. Megan was charming that first weekend. She complimented my cooking. She asked questions about the house and pretended to be fascinated by my answers. She laughed at my jokes, even the ones that were not very funny. She helped clear the table and insisted on doing the dishes herself. "You have raised a wonderful son, Jared," she told me on the evening before they left, standing in the kitchen where Patricia's recipes were still taped to the cabinet door. "I can see where he gets his values." I was moved. I was fooled. I thought I had found a daughter to replace the one I never had, a woman who would love my son the way Patricia had loved me, a partner who would help him build the kind of life his mother and I had built together. The wedding was 2 years later, a large affair at a country club that belonged to Megan's father, with 300 guests and a 12-piece band and ice sculptures that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. I paid for the rehearsal dinner, which was all I could afford, and I wore my best suit and tried not to feel out of place among Megan's wealthy relatives. Don, Megan's father, made his first pointed comment that night. We were standing at the bar, waiting for drinks, and he looked me up and down with an expression of polite condescension. "So," he said, "Bradley tells me you are in construction." "I own a construction company," I corrected. "We build custom homes." Custom homes. He said the words as if they were slightly distasteful. "Manual labor. Working with your hands. Very honest work, I suppose." "It is honest work," I agreed, choosing not to take the bait, "and it has allowed me to provide a good life for my family." "I am sure it has. I am sure it has." Don turned to accept his drink from the bartender. "Of course, Megan is accustomed to a certain standard of living. I hope Bradley can provide that for her. I hope the transition will not be too challenging." I did not respond. I took my drink and walked away. But I remember that conversation, and I remember the slight tightening in my chest, the first warning sign that I chose to ignore. When they had Ethan, I was overjoyed. A grandson, another generation. The family Patricia had wanted was continuing, growing, becoming what she had always dreamed. Ethan was born on a rainy Thursday in March, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair in his father's eyes. I drove to the hospital as soon as Bradley called, arriving at 3 a.m, still wearing my work clothes from the day before. I had not slept. I had not showered. I did not care. When the nurse placed Ethan in my arms for the first time, something shifted inside me. I looked at this tiny person, this continuation of my bloodline, this living proof that Patricia and I had created something lasting, and I felt a love so intense it frightened me. I had loved Patricia. I had loved Bradley. But this was different. This was primal. This was a love that came from somewhere deep and ancient, a love that connected me to every father and grandfather who had ever held a newborn child and felt the weight of generations. "Hello, Ethan." I whispered, tears running down my face. "I am your grandfather, and I am going to teach you everything I know. I am going to build you the best treehouse anyone has ever seen. I am going to take you fishing and camping and show you how to use tools. I am going to love you every single day of my life." Ethan looked up at me with those unfocused newborn eyes, and I could have sworn he smiled. I invited them to move into the house. Not just invited, begged. I told Bradley that the house was too big for one person, that there were 3 bedrooms sitting empty, that Ethan should grow up where his father had grown up, surrounded by the same trees, the same neighborhood, the same sense of permanence that Bradley had known as a child. Bradley was hesitant. Megan was resistant. She wanted their own space, she said. She did not want to live with her father-in-law, she said. She had concerns about boundaries and independence. But I persisted. I offered them the entire upstairs, all 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, completely private. I would stay in a master bedroom on the main floor, which Patricia and I had designed specifically to be separate from the rest of the house, accessible from the back entrance, almost like a small apartment within the larger home. I would not interfere. I promised. I would respect their privacy. I just wanted to be close to my grandson. I just wanted to hear the sounds of a family in this house again. Eventually, they agreed. Bradley convinced Megan by pointing out that living rent-free would allow them to save for their own house someday. Megan agreed because she was practical, because free housing was free housing, because she could tolerate my presence if it meant financial advantage. I should have recognized the warning signs then. I should have noticed that Megan was calculating, not accepting. I should have seen that her agreement came with conditions, with expectations, with a long-term plan that had nothing to do with family and everything to do with acquisition. But I was so happy to have them there. So happy to hear Ethan running to the hallways, to see Bradley sitting in the living room where he'd grown up, to cook meals in Patricia's kitchen for a family again instead of for myself alone. I ignored the small discomforts. I explained away the subtle insults. I pretended that Megan's coldness was just her personality, just the way some people are, just something I needed to accept. For 5 years, we lived like that. 5 years of coexistence that I mistook for family. 5 years of dinners together, holidays together, mornings where I would make pancakes for Ethan before school because Megan said she did not have time. 5 years of watching my grandson grow, of helping him with homework, of teaching him how to throw a baseball and how to use basic tools and how to be a man in a world that does not always make it easy. I love those 5 years. Even with the tensions, even with Megan's passive-aggressive comment about my outdated furniture and my old-fashioned cooking and my constant presence, I loved being part of family again. I loved having purpose. I loved waking up each morning knowing that there were people in my house who needed me, or at least tolerated me, or at least had not yet figured out how to get rid of me. But things began to change about 18 months ago. Megan's father, Don, had retired from his insurance business and moved to the area. Suddenly, Don was around all the time. Don with his opinions about everything. Don with his comparisons between his own house, a modern monstrosity in the new subdivision, and the old-fashioned home his daughter was stuck living in. Don with his comments about how Megan deserved better, how she had sacrificed so much, how she was wasting her best years, taking care of an old man who would not even let them redecorate. I noticed a change in Bradley first. My son had always been somewhat deferential to his wife, which I understood, which I had been with Patricia in certain ways. But now his deference was turning into something else. Submission. He would look to Megan before answering even simple questions. He would check her reaction before agreeing to anything I suggested. He had become, somehow, a guest in his own marriage, following rules he did not fully understand. Then the small cruelties began. Megan started scheduling family events at times when she knew I would be unavailable. Doctor's appointments, church obligations, meetings at the senior center where I volunteered. When I would come home and find out that they'd gone to Ethan's school play without me, or had celebrated Bradley's promotion without including me, or had hosted a dinner party for their friends in the dining room where I was not welcome, Megan would apologize in that voice of hers, the one that made apologies sound like accusations. "We tried to reach you," she would say. "We left messages. We assumed you were busy." I started checking my phone obsessively. There were never any messages. There were never any missed calls. She was lie, of course, but What could I prove? What could I say that would not make me sound paranoid, that would not give them more ammunition for whatever case they were building? Because they were building a case. I understand that now. Every forgotten invitation, every missed dinner, every moment of exclusion was a brick in a wall they were constructing around me, a wall that would eventually become high enough to justify what they did on Christmas night. The conversations about the future started 6 months ago. Megan, always with Bradley at her side like a silent accessory, would sit me down at the kitchen table and talk about options. Would I consider assisted living? Had I thought about the burden I was placing on the family? Did I understand how hard it was for them to worry about me constantly? I was 63 years old. I was in perfect health. I had just finished building a deck for my neighbor Harold, a project that required a week of hard physical labor, and I had not even been sore afterward. There was nothing wrong with me except that I own a house that my daughter-in-law wanted, and I was not dying fast enough to give it to her. I am fine, I would tell them. I am healthy. I am not a burden. I take care of myself, and I take care of this house, which, I would like to remind you, I built with my own hands and I own outright. There is no mortgage. There are no debts. This house is free and clear, and it is mine until I decide otherwise. Megan would smile her understanding smile. Bradley would nod uncomfortably, and then they would try again a few weeks later, with new angles, new concerns, new carefully worded suggestions that I should simplify my life by giving up the only thing that still connected me to my wife and my past. The breaking point came in October. I came home from a hardware store to find Megan, showing a man in a suit around the house. The man was taking notes. The man was taking photographs. The man, I learned later, was a real estate appraiser. What is going on here? I asked, standing in my own doorway, holding a bag of screws I had bought to fix the fence in the backyard. Megan smiled. We are just exploring options, Jared. Just being prepared. It is always good to know what things are worth, is it not? This is my house, I said. You do not have the right to bring appraisers into my house without my permission. Actually, Megan said, in a tone that suggested she had been waiting for this moment. Bradley and I live here too. We have been living here for 5 years. We have rights as residents. And we are thinking about the future, about what happens when circumstances change. She meant when I die. She was standing in my house, the house I built for my wife, the house I had invited her to share out of love for my son and grandson, and she was calculating how much it would be worth when I was dead. I asked the appraiser to leave. He looked uncomfortable, but complied. Megan looked angry, but said nothing more. That night, at dinner, I told Bradley that I wanted to talk to him privately. He said there was nothing to talk about that could not be said in front of his wife. Megan smiled. I lay awake that night in the bedroom Patricia and I had shared, looking at the ceiling I had put up with my own hands, and I made a decision. I called my attorney the next morning. Richard Greenwood had been my lawyer for 30 years. He had handled the closing when I bought the land for this house. He had drawn up my will when Patricia got sick. He had been a friend, a confidant, a steady presence through the hardest years of my life. They are trying to push me out, I told him. My own son and his wife. They want the house, and they are trying to make me leave so they can have it. Richard listened. He asked questions. He took notes. And then he said something that changed everything. Jared, you know you could sell the house at any time. It is yours, free and clear. You could put it on the market tomorrow, and there is nothing they could do about it. I had not thought about that. I had been so focused on defending the house, on protecting it, on keeping my promise to Patricia, that I had not considered the possibility of a strategic retreat. The possibility that sometimes the best way to win a war is to burn the castle yourself rather than let the enemy take it. If I sold the house, I asked slowly, thinking it through, what would happen to them? Legally, Richard explained. Bradley and Megan were residents, but they were not owners. They had no claim to the property. If I sold the house, the new owners could evict them with proper notice. They would have no recourse, no legal standing, no way to stop it. They have been living there for 5 years. I said, does that not give them some rights? It gives them tenant rights, Richard said, which means they are entitled to proper notice before eviction, usually 30 to 60 days, depending on local laws. But ownership rights? None. Zero. The house is yours. You can do whatever you want with it. I thought about Patricia. I thought about my promise. I thought about what she would want me to do if she could see what had become of our family, what her son had become, what kind of woman he had married, what kind of life was being lived in the house we had built together. And I realized something. Patricia had asked me to keep the house in the family. She had asked me to make sure Bradley raised his children there. But Bradley was not raising his child. Megan was. Bradley was a passenger in his own life, controlled by a woman who had no love for our family, no respect for our history, no intention of honoring anything Patricia and I had built. My promise was to Patricia. My promise was to preserve what we had created, to protect the family we had made. And the family was broken. The family was being poisoned from within. Keeping my promise no longer meant keeping the house. Keeping my promise meant saving what could still be saved and letting go of what was already lost. I told Richard the first one to sell. Quietly, quickly, before anyone knew what was happening. Richard said he knew a developer who had been interested in properties on Maple Ridge Road. The area had become desirable, and the developer wanted to build a small community of luxury homes. My property, with its 2 acres and established trees, was exactly what he was looking for. We began negotiations in November. I did everything through Richard, who communicated through intermediaries, who made sure nothing could be traced back to me until the deal was done. The developer offered $2.1 million. I accepted. The paperwork took 6 weeks. I signed documents in Richard's office, never at the house, never where Bradley or Megan might see something suspicious. I pretended that everything was normal. I went to Thanksgiving dinner. I smiled at Megan's backhanded compliments about my cooking. I nodded along when Don explained how the house could be modernized with some sensible renovations. I played the part of the oblivious old man they thought I was. On December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, I signed the final papers. The sale was complete. The house on Maple Ridge Road, the house I had built with my own hands 41 years ago, the house where I had raised my son and buried my wife and kept my memories, now belonged to Harrison Development, LLC. They had given me 60 days to vacate. I had negotiated that specifically. 60 days from December 23rd put the deadline in late February. But I had also negotiated a clause that I could notify the developer when I was ready, and they would take possession immediately, giving the current residents the standard 30-day eviction notice. On Christmas morning, I woke up early. I put on my best suit, the charcoal one I had worn at Patricia's funeral, the one I saved for occasions that demanded respect. I made breakfast for the family. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, fresh squeezed orange juice. I set the table with Patricia's china, the set we had received as a wedding gift 43 years ago. I was cheerful. I was attentive. I was everything they expected me to be, the grateful old man who was allowed to remain in his own house by the generosity of his children. I played my part perfectly. The day passed as Christmas days do. Ethan opened presents. Bradley watched football. Megan complained about the noise level and the mess and the disruption to her carefully planned schedule. Don arrived at 3, bearing expensive wine and even more expensive opinions. I smiled and nodded and waited. Dinner was at 6. I had cooked the honey-glazed ham, Patricia's recipe. I had made the mashed potatoes and the green bean casserole and the cranberry sauce from scratch. I had baked the rolls and set the table and lit the candles and done everything my wife would have done if she had been there. We sat down to eat. We said grace. We passed the food. We made small talk about the weather and the presents and Ethan's plans for the rest of his Christmas break. Normal, comfortable, familiar. Then, between the main course and dessert, Megan cleared her throat. She looked at Bradley. He nodded, looking pale and uncomfortable. Don leaned back in his chair with an expression of anticipation. "Jared," Megan said, "we need to talk about something important." "Of course," I replied. "What is it?" Bradley took over, reading from what sounded like a prepared script. "Dad, We have been thinking a lot about the future, about what is best for everyone, and we have come to a decision as a family. I noticed that Ethan was looking at his plate, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. We think it would be better for everyone if you were not part of our daily lives anymore. We are not saying we do not love you. We are saying that your presence here in this house is making things difficult for our marriage, for our son, for our future. Megan nodded approvingly. Don smirked. Bradley took a deep breath and delivered the line that I will remember for the rest of my life. Dad, we took a vote. You are no longer part of this family. There it was, the declaration, the exile, the conclusion to a plan that had been building for months, maybe years. They had discussed it. They had debated it. They had taken a vote, as if my place in their lives was a matter of parliamentary procedure. I looked around the table, at my son, who could not meet my eyes, at my daughter-in-law, who was smiling with undisguised satisfaction, at Don, who was nodding like a man watching a business deal close successfully, at Ethan, my grandson, who was crying silently into his napkin, and I reached into my jacket pocket. I appreciate your honesty, I said, keeping my voice calm. I know that must have been difficult for you. Megan's smile flickered. She had expected something else. Anger, maybe. Begging. The dramatic exit of a defeated old man. Before I go, I continued, I want to give you something. A parting gift. A final gesture from a father who apparently no longer has a family. I pulled out the envelope. I handed it to Bradley. What is this? He asked, confusion replacing discomfort. Open it. He opened the envelope. He pulled out the papers. He read the first page. This is a deed of sale. For this house. Bradley's voice was shaking. Dad, what is this? It is exactly what it looks like. I said, I sold the house. The sale closed 2 days ago. The property now belongs to Harrison Development, LLC. They are very excited about the location. They plan to tear it down and build 4 luxury townhomes. Megan grabbed the papers from Bradley. Her eyes scanned the document, looking for the catch, looking for the loophole. This cannot be legal, she said. We live here. We have rights. You have tenant rights, I replied, which means you are entitled to 30 days' notice before eviction. The notice is in the envelope. You will find it behind the sale documents. You have until January 24th to vacate the premises. Don stood up from his chair. Now wait just a minute. You cannot do this. This is your son's home, your grandson's home. You cannot just sell it out from under them. I can, I said. I did. It is done. Bradley was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, fear, raw animal fear. The fear of a man who has just realized that his foundation has crumbled, that everything he thought he had was never really his, that the safety he had taken for granted was an illusion maintained by someone else's generosity. Dad, he whispered. Dad, please. We can talk about this. I did not mean what I said. Megan made me say it. She has been planning this for months. I told her it was a bad idea. I told her you would be hurt. Do not blame your wife, I said. You made your choice. You had many opportunities to choose differently. You chose her. Every time. For years. You chose her over me. Over your mother's memory. Over your own son. You let her treat me like an inconvenience in my own home. You let her plan my eviction while eating my food at my table. Now you can live with your choice. But where will we go? Bradley's voice cracked. We have no savings. We spent everything on what? I asked quietly. I knew the answer. I had found the credit card statements months ago. The designer clothes. The expensive vacations. The private school tuition that Megan insisted upon because public school was not good enough for her son. They had been living beyond their means for years, spending money they did not have because they assumed my house would eventually be their inheritance. Megan stood up, finally recovering her composure. We will sue. We will take you to court. You cannot sell a house that your son has been promised. There are implied agreements. There are expectations. There is nothing implied about property ownership. I said, I never promised Bradley this house. I invited him to live here. There is a significant legal difference. My attorney can explain it to you if you like. He is very thorough. This is elder abuse, Don declared, apparently believing that loudness was a substitute for accuracy. You are clearly not in your right mind. We will have you declared incompetent. I just completed a complex real estate transaction with full legal representation. I replied, "Good luck with your incompetency claim." Don sputtered. Megan glared. Bradley sat frozen, the papers trembling in his hands. And Ethan, my grandson, looked up from his plate. His eyes were red from crying. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, does this mean I have to leave? Does this mean I did not get to see you anymore?" I stood up from my chair. I walked around the table. I knelt beside my grandson and took his hands in mine. "Ethan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. This is not about you. Nothing that has happened tonight is your fault. I love you more than I can ever express. I have loved you since the day you were born, and I will love you until the day I die. But you are making us leave," he said. "You sold our house." "I sold my house," I said gently. "The house that I built, that my wife and I made together, that your father and I shared for many years. It was my house to sell. And I sold it because sometimes when a family is broken, the only way to fix it is to break apart everything that is holding the broken pieces together." I did not understand. "You will," I said. "Someday, when you are older, you will understand that love is not just about giving people what they want. Sometimes love means refusing to let people destroy themselves. Sometimes love means making hard choices that hurt in the short term, but save everyone in the long term. Will I still get to see you?" "As often as you want. I am moving to a new place, a smaller place, but there will always be room for you. You can visit me anytime. You can call me anytime. You can come stay with me on weekends if your parents agree. I am not leaving you. I am just leaving this house." Ethan hugged me. He hugged me so tightly that I could feel his heart beating against my chest, could feel his tears soaking into my jacket, could feel the desperation of a child who has just watched his world explode. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am sorry for what Mom said. I am sorry for what you made Dad say. I told them it was wrong. I told them you were not bothering anyone. They did not listen." "I know," I said. "You are a good boy, Ethan. Do not ever let anyone make you into something you are not. Do not let anyone convince you that cruelty is wisdom or that selfishness is strength. You are better than that. You have always been better than that." I stood up and looked around the room one last time. At the fireplace I had built with stones from our property. At the windows I had installed, the ones Patricia had picked out from a catalog because she liked how the light came through them in the afternoon. At the kitchen where I had made thousands of meals, the dining room where I had hosted dozens of celebrations, the walls that held the echoes of a lifetime. "I will be out by January 15th, I said. "You can have the remaining 2 weeks to make your own arrangements. The new owners have been notified. They will contact you to coordinate the eviction if you are not out by the deadline." "Dad," Bradley said one last time. "Dad, please. There has to be another way. We can fix this. We can work this out." "We could have worked out any time in the last 5 years," I replied. "Any time you wanted to treat me like a father instead of an obstacle. Any time you wanted to tell your wife that I belonged in this family. Any time you wanted to stand up for what was right instead of what was easy. You had 5 years of chances. You used them all up." I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I walked to the front door, the door I had hung myself, the door that still had the small dent from when Bradley had thrown his bicycle against it in a teenage tantrum 30 years ago. "Merry Christmas," I said, without looking back. "And good luck." I walked out into the cold December night. The snow was falling softly, covering the driveway, covering the yard, covering the world in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Behind me, I could hear Megan screaming at Bradley. I could hear Don shouting about lawsuits. I could hear Ethan crying. But I did not turn around. I got in my truck, the same pickup I had driven for 15 years, and I started the engine. I pulled out of the driveway one last time, and I drove. I drove for 2 hours that night. I did not have a destination. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and the explosion I had just caused. I drove through towns I had not visited in decades, past houses I had built in my younger years, through the landscape of a life that suddenly felt both impossibly long and impossibly short. Eventually, I ended up at a truck stop on the highway. I bought a cup of coffee and sat in a booth by the window, watching the trucks come and go, watching the Christmas travelers hurrying to their destinations, watching the world continue turning despite everything that had just happened. And I thought about Patricia. I thought about the day we met at a county fair in 1979, when she was working at a booth selling homemade jewelry, and I was there with some friends from a construction company. She had been wearing a blue dress with yellow flowers on it, and her hair was longer than anyone else's, and she had laughed at something one of her customers said, and that laugh had hit me like a hammer to the chest. I thought about our first date, dinner in an Italian restaurant that no longer exists, followed by a walk along the river where I had been too nervous to hold her hand until she grabbed mine and said, "For heaven's sake, Jared, I am not going to bite you." I thought about our wedding, a small ceremony in her parents' backyard, with maybe 60 guests and a cake her mother had made and a band that consisted of her cousin's friend playing acoustic guitar. I had cried during my vows. I had not expected to cry, had not planned to cry, but when I looked at her standing there in her white dress, when I realized that this extraordinary woman had chosen to spend her life with me, the tears just came. I thought about Bradley's birth, the terror and the joy and the overwhelming responsibility of holding this tiny person who depended entirely on us for everything. I thought about teaching him to walk, teaching him to talk, teaching him to throw a ball, and ride a bike and tie his shoes, and do all the things that fathers teach their sons. I thought about Patricia's diagnosis, the day the doctor used words like aggressive and advanced and limited options. I thought about the months of treatment, the hope and the despair, the good days and the bad days, the slow and terrible process of losing someone you love while they're still sitting right next to you. I thought about her death, peaceful in the end, in our bedroom, in the bed we had shared for 25 years, with me holding her hand and telling her that it was okay, that she could let go, that I would be fine, that I would take care of everything. And I thought about the promise I had made, the promise to keep the house and the family, the promise that now felt impossible to keep. But sitting in that truck stop, drinking bad coffee and watching the snowfall, I realized something. The promise was not about the house. The promise was about the family. Patricia had asked me to preserve what we had built, to protect the legacy of our love, to make sure that the next generation had a foundation as strong as the one we had given them. The house was a symbol of that foundation, but the foundation itself was something else. The foundation was love, loyalty, respect, sacrifice, all the things I had tried to teach Bradley, all the values Patricia and I had modeled in our marriage, all the principles that were supposed to pass from one generation to the next. And those things had not been passed. Somewhere along the way, they had been lost. Bradley had become a man who could sit silently while his wife planned his father's eviction. He had become a man who could tell his father, on Christmas night, that he was no longer part of the family. He had become something Patricia and I had never intended him to become. The house could not fix that. No amount of preservation could repair what had been broken inside my son. Keeping the house would only have enabled more years of disrespect, more years of exploitation, more years of pretending that we were a family when we were really just strangers who happened to share a roof. By selling the house, I had done the only thing left to do. I had forced the truth into the open. I had made everyone acknowledge what had really been happening. I had shattered the illusion so that maybe, someday, something real could be built in its place. It might not work. Bradley might never speak to me again. Megan might convince him that I was a villain, that I betrayed them, that my actions were unforgivable. They might raise Ethan to hate me, to see me as a grandfather who destroyed their lives, to remember this Christmas as a night everything went wrong. But at least it would be honest. At least we would all know where we stood. At least the pretending would be over. I finished my coffee. I got back in my truck. I drove to a motel on the outskirts of town and checked into a room with a view of the parking lot and a television that only got basic cable. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. I had been planning my exit for months, Of course. The new apartment was already rented, a modest 2-bedroom place on the 3rd floor of a building downtown. I had been moving things out of the house gradually, a box at a time, hiding them in a storage unit I had rented under a slightly different version of my name. By the time Christmas came, all I really needed to take were my clothes, my tools, and the boxes of photographs and mementos that I could not leave behind. I moved out on January 10th, 5 days before the deadline I had given myself. I hired a moving company, 2 young men who worked quickly and efficiently and asked no questions about why a man was leaving a house that was clearly his life's work. Bradley called me twice during those weeks. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. His message was a mixture of anger and pleading, accusations and apologies, threats and desperate attempts at reconciliation. He said Megan was looking for a lawyer. He said they were going to fight this. He said I had destroyed everything. The second time I answered, "Dad," he said. "Dad, we need to talk." "Talk," I said. "You cannot do this. You cannot just throw us out. We have nowhere to go. You have Megan's father's house. Don's been bragging about how big it is for years. I am sure he would be happy to take you in." Silence on the line. Then he said we could stay for 2 months. Maximum. He said he did not sign up to raise another family. I was not surprised. Don had always been more interested in criticizing my house than in offering his own. He liked to play the generous patriarch when it cost him nothing, but when real generosity was required, he was nowhere to be found. "Then you will have to find something else," I said. "That is what adults do. They find solutions to their problems. We do not have any money." "Then get jobs. Megan has a degree. Does she not? Business administration. If I remember correctly, there must be companies that would hire her. She has not worked in 10 years. "Then it is time," she started. More silence. Then Bradley said something that surprised me. "Dad, I am sorry. I am truly sorry for what happened. I never wanted any of this. Megan, she has these ideas about how things should be, and she keeps pushing until she gets what she wants. I tried to tell her she was wrong about you. I tried to defend you, but you know how she is." "I know exactly how she is," I said. "What I do not know is how you became someone who lets his wife treat his father like garbage. That is what I do not understand. That is what keeps me up at night. I love her, Dad. That is not love. What you have with Megan is not love. Love does not make you into someone you hate. Love does not require you to betray the people who raised you. Love does not mean sitting silently while your partner destroys your family one insult at a time. You do not know her like I do. You are right. I do not. I only know the woman who has spent 5 years making me feel like an intruder in my own home. I only know the woman who smiled when you told me I was no longer part of the family. I only know the woman who brought an appraiser into my house to calculate how much it would be worth when I died." Bradley had no response to that. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a minute. "What do you want from me, Dad?" he finally asked. "What would it take to fix this?" "I want you to leave her," I said. "I want you to take Ethan and start over. Find someone who loves you for who you are, not for what she can get from you. Build a life based on honesty and respect instead of manipulation and control. I cannot leave her. She is my wife. She is Ethan's mother. Then there is nothing left to discuss. You have made your choice. Now you have to live with it." I hung up the phone. He called back twice more that day. I did not answer. The weeks turned into months. I settled into my new apartment, which was small but comfortable. I hung pictures of Patricia on the walls. I set up a small workshop in the second bedroom, where I could do minor projects, repairs for neighbors who had heard I was good with my hands. I started volunteering more at the senior center, teaching basic carpentry skills to other retirees who wanted something to do with their time. I heard from Bradley occasionally, text messages mostly, updates about their situation that I had not asked for. They had moved into an apartment in a cheaper part of town. Megan had gotten a job at a marketing firm, entry level, far below what she had expected. Ethan was adjusting to his new school. Things were stable. I heard from Ethan more often. He called me every Sunday evening, our standing appointment. We talked about school, about friends, about the books he was reading and the games he was playing. He never mentioned his mother, except to say she was fine. He never mentioned the house except once, when he told me he had driven past a construction site and seen the foundation being dug for the new townhomes. It looks so different, he said. I cannot even tell where our house was anymore. That is how it goes. I told him, things get torn down and new things get built. That is life. You cannot hold on to everything forever. Do you miss it? I miss your grandmother. I miss the memories we made there. But the house itself? No, not anymore. It was just walls and a roof. The important things, the things that really mattered, I still have. I have the photographs. I have the stories. I have you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I miss how things used to be before Mom started being so... I do not know. Before everything got complicated. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that I remember how it was. I remember when we were happy. We can be happy again, I said. Maybe not in the same way. Maybe not in the same place. But happiness is not something you find in a building. It is something you build inside yourself. It is something you share with the people who matter to you. That sounds like something Grandma would say. Where do you think I learned it? He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in months. And in that moment, despite everything, despite the loss and the pain and the betrayal, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. The call came 8 months after Christmas. Bradley. Not a text message this time, but an actual phone call, which meant something important. Dad, he said. Dad, I need to see you. Can we meet somewhere? Just the two of us. We agreed to meet at a diner, halfway between my apartment and their new place. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a booth, looking older than I had ever seen him look. He had lost weight. His hair was graying at the temples. His eyes had a hollow quality that reminded me of the veterans I had known, men who had seen too much and carried it with them everywhere they went. Thanks for coming, he said when I sat down. I almost did not. I know. I would not have blamed you. We ordered coffee. We sat in silence. Outside the window, traffic flowed past. Ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that two men were sitting in this diner trying to figure out how to put a family back together. Megan and I are getting divorced, Bradley finally said. I set down my coffee cup. I see. It has been coming for a while. The move, the money problems, having to actually work for a living instead of waiting for, well, it put pressure on us. Pressure that exposed things that were already broken. What kind of things? She has been seeing someone, a guy from her office. I found out 2 months ago. She said it started after we moved, but I do not know if I believe her. I do not know if I believe anything she says anymore. I wanted to say, I told you so. I wanted to remind him that I had warned him, years ago, that Megan was not what she seemed. I wanted to point out that everything I had predicted had come true, that his loyalty to his wife had destroyed his relationship with his father, and now his wife was betraying him anyway. But I did not say any of those things, because sitting across from me was my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had watched grow up, and he was in pain, real pain, the kind of pain that does not need additional wounds. I am sorry, I said. That must be incredibly difficult. I deserve it. I know I deserve it. After everything I did to you, after the way I let her treat you, this is karma. This is what happens when you choose the wrong person and spend 20 years pretending everything is fine. Nobody deserves to be cheated on. Whatever mistakes you made with me, whatever choices you regret, that does not mean you deserve to be betrayed by your wife. Bradley looked at me with something like disbelief. You're defending me? After what I said on Christmas. After the way I treated you. You are my son. I am angry at you. I am hurt by you. I may never fully forgive you for some of the things you did, but I am still your father. That does not change because you made bad choices. That does not change because we have been apart. He started crying then. Not quietly, not discreetly. He sobbed like a child, right there in the diner, in front of the waitresses and the other customers and anyone else who happened to be watching. He cried like a man who had been holding in years of pain and could not hold it anymore. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Bradley," I said, "listen to me. What happened with the house? What happened on Christmas? That is in the past. I cannot undo what I did, and I would not undo it even if I could, but that does not mean we cannot move forward. That does not mean we cannot find a way to be father and son again." "How?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "How do we do that after everything?" "One day at a time. One conversation at a time. We start over. We treat each other like people who are worth respecting. We say what we mean, and we do what we say. We stop pretending and start being honest. I do not know if I know how to do that. I have been pretending for so long. Then I will teach you, just like I taught you how to ride a bike and throw a ball and everything else. This is just another skill. Honesty is a skill, and you can learn it." He squeezed my hand. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry for everything. I know you are, and I forgive you." We sat there for a long time, holding hands across the table, father and son reunited in a diner that smelled like bacon and stale coffee. It was not the reconciliation I had imagined. It was not a dramatic scene with tears and speeches, and everything resolved in a single moment. It was just two men, damaged by their own mistakes, try to figure out how to be a family again. After that day, things began to change. Slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust each other after a long betrayal. Bradley moved into a small apartment near mine. The divorce was brutal. Megan fought for everything, claimed everything, made accusations that I knew were not true, but that still hurt to hear. In the end, the court split things down the middle. She got the furniture and the car. He got the debts and the memories. Ethan spent half his time with each parent. On his weeks with Bradley, he came to see me almost every day. We cooked dinner together. We worked on small projects in my workshop. We talked about school and sports and girls, and all the things grandfathers and grandsons are supposed to talk about. I watched Bradley become a different person. Without Megan's influence, without the constant pressure to be someone he was not, he started to remember who he had been before. He started laughing again. He started calling me just to talk, not because he needed something or because there was a crisis. He started saying, "I love you," at the end of our conversations, something he had not done since before he got married. One night, about a year after our meeting at the diner, we were sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. Ethan was inside, asleep on the couch, exhausted from a day of helping me build a bookshelf. "I keep thinking about the house," Bradley said, "about what it meant to you and Mom, about how much of your life went into building it. Do you regret that I sold it?" He thought for a long moment. "At first, I was furious. I thought you had destroyed everything. I thought you had taken something precious away from me just to hurt me. And now I think you saved my life. If you had not sold that house, I would still be with Megan. I would still be pretending. I would still be becoming more and more like someone I did not want to be. You took away the thing I thought I wanted, and by doing that, you gave me the chance to figure out what I actually needed. That was not my plan. I was just trying to protect myself. I know, but sometimes the right thing happens for the wrong reasons. Sometimes people make choices that turn out better than they intended. You were trying to escape. You ended up rescuing me too. I looked at my son, at the man he was becoming, at the father he was learning to be, and I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would say if she could see us now, sitting on this balcony, reconciled and healing and finally honest with each other. "Your mother would be proud of you," I said. "You think so?" "I know so. She always believed in you. She always knew you were capable of more than you thought. She would be proud of the work you have done to become a better person." Bradley smiled. It was a real smile, the kind I had not seen in years. "Thanks, Dad. That means more than you know." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car horn honked. The city went about its evening business. indifferent to the two men on the balcony who had just discovered that families can break and families can heal, and sometimes the breaking is what makes the healing possible. Ethan woke up around 9 and stumbled out onto the balcony, rubbing his eyes. "What are you guys doing out here?" he asked. "Just talking," I said. "About what?" "About how lucky we are," Bradley said. "About how good it feels to be together." Ethan looked at us both, at his father and his grandfather sitting side by side in the cool evening air. Then he grabbed a chair and squeezed between us. "Can I stay?" he asked. "I like it out here. I like being with both of you." "Of course you can stay," I said. "You can always stay. You are family." It is a year later now. I am 65 years old, living in my small apartment, surrounded by photographs and memories and the tools of my trade. The house on Maple Ridge Road is gone, replaced by 4 luxury townhomes that sold for over $1 million each. I drive past sometimes, on my way to visit Bradley or pick up Ethan. I barely recognize the place. But that is okay. Houses are just buildings. What matters is what you build inside them. What matters is the love you share, the lessons you teach, the values you pass from one generation to the next. Patricia taught me that. It took me a long time to truly understand it. It took losing everything to finally learn what could never be taken away. Bradley is doing well. He has a new job, a good job, something he found on his own, without anyone's help. He is dating again, carefully this time, with his eyes open and his heart protected. He calls me every few days, not because he has to, but because he wants to, because we are friends now, in addition to being father and son. Megan is out of our lives, mostly. She sees Ethan on her scheduled weeks, but the boy spends most of his free time with us. He told me recently that he prefers it that way. "Mom's house is cold," he said. "Not the temperature, just the feeling. It feels cold there. It feels warm here." I understood exactly what he meant. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know how many years I have left or what challenges still await me. But I know that I am not facing them alone. I know that my family, the family that really matters, is stronger now than it has ever been. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the right decisions. Sometimes you have to destroy something precious to save something even more precious. Sometimes the only way to teach someone you love is to let them fail, let them hurt, let them learn the lessons that words alone can never convey. That is what I did on Christmas night, when I handed my son an envelope and watched his world collapse. It looked like cruelty. It felt like revenge. But it was, in its own strange way, an act of love. The hardest kind of love. The kind that does not protect people from consequences, but forces them to face those consequences head on. And it worked. Not immediately. Not easily. But eventually. Slowly. Painfully. It worked. Bradley is a better man today than he was 2 years ago. He is a better father. He is a better son. He knows what loyalty means now, what respect requires, what love actually looks like when you strip away all the pretending. Ethan is growing up with a grandfather who loves him unconditionally. He knows that family is not about blood or obligation, but about choice, about showing up, about being there when it matters. And I am at peace. Finally, after all the anger and the hurt, and the years of feeling invisible in my own home, I am at peace. Patricia would understand. She would forgive me for breaking my promise about the house. She would see that I kept the real promise, the important promise, the promise to protect our family and preserve our legacy. The house is gone, but the family remains. And that, in the end, is all that matters. Thanks for listening. It took me a lifetime to learn that respect is not given, it is earned, and sometimes you have to fight for it. I have left 2 more stories on your screen from men who learned the same lesson. Click the one that speaks to you. And if you believe family is about loyalty, not just blood, tap the bell. Remember, it is never too late to stand up for yourself.